welcome back to my channel. My name is Carly Stevens. I'm the author of the young adult fantasy novel Firian Rising, and this is English Nerd. So today I wanted to settle the question of what is Old English. So I regularly hear students describing Shakespeare's works, for instance, as Old English, and although that is an older form of English, it's not actually Old English. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a history lesson of where the language came from. So strap in, keep your hands and arms inside the vehicle at all times. Here we go. Okay, so England was, back in the year 500 or so, starting from then, an Anglo-Saxon nation. So people from the area that is now Germany came and settled in England. If you want to look that up, you can go to more history-oriented channels. But the reason that I'm bringing that up is that Anglo-Saxon, the language, is technically Old English. They're synonymous. So when you study Anglo-Saxon, you're studying Old English and vice versa. The language sounds more like German than English, although it is technically neither one. So let me show you an example of what Old English or Anglo-Saxon actually would look like. It's a foreign language. So, for instance, Beowulf is the most famous work that still exists that was written in Anglo-Saxon or Old English. So if you look at this, for instance, this is a dual language version of Beowulf. This is the Anglo-Saxon side. Of course, there's the modern English side because I cannot read this side here, at least most of the words. I do know a handful of Old English words because when I call myself an English nerd, I am not posing. It's the real deal. But it's clearly a different language. It sounds like this. So if you look at the very beginning of Beowulf, I'll just read the first line. Hopefully it can focus there on the words. First lines go, Hwat, wegar denim in yara dagum, theod kuninga thrimja frunon hutha athalengas, ellen fremedon. So hopefully if you're out there, my professor who taught me Anglo-Saxon and medieval works, that was still pretty close. I had to memorize more than that for a class one time, but it's been a few years. So anyway, that is Old English, Anglo-Saxon. The shift toward what is now more modern English happened after 1066, the Battle of Hastings. William the Conqueror came over from France and took over what is now, of course, England, the area of the UK. And so because the French took over, all of the lords and the nobles, and of course the king himself, spoke French. So if you wanted to be promoted to higher positions, you had to be able to speak French. So over the course of the next couple hundred years, the language shifted in England from being that more Germanic Old English to what we now call Middle English, which of course is in between the languages, the one that we know today, and Anglo-Saxon. So a couple of examples of that Middle English would be the Canterbury Tales and the Pearl or Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which were written by the same person. Now the languages look a little bit different. So this, for instance, is the Canterbury Tales. I don't know how well you can see that. It's readable. It's difficult, but it's readable. I'll pronounce a few lines of it here in a second. But the Pearl poet, or the person who wrote Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, is a little bit different. The reason for the differences is that after William the Conqueror took over in 1066, the people became more landed, so more glued to their particular areas. You know, families didn't leave a particular area for generations, and so dialects became more regionalized. That's why, to this day, if you hear somebody with a Scottish accent, it sounds different than somebody with a Londoner accent. It's the difference that started back in Middle English times. So I am not familiar with how to pronounce the kind of Northern England, Scottish almost, version of Middle English. But I can pronounce some of the Chaucer version. So the very beginning of Canterbury Tales, for instance, let's just look at it to remind myself, would go, Wan the Dabrel with his shore sota, the drocht of March had passed to the rota, and bathed every vine in switch liqueur, of which virtue engendered is the floor. When Zephyrus echo with his weight of breath, in spirit half in every holt and hath the tender croppus, and the younger son hath in the ram is half coursey runna. And small a fool as Mac and Melodia that slept in all the night with open ears. So the first sentence goes on for quite a while. I'll just stop it there. Anyway, you can hear some words that sound familiar, even if they're not necessarily pronounced the way that you would normally pronounce them. Ia is not how you would normally pronounce I, but you know, things change. So that's Middle English. It's in between. It has some lend words from German. It became a lot more Frenchified. And so you fast forward to about 1450 or so, you start getting printing presses, and language starts getting a little bit more standardized across England, and that's where we start to get modern English. It's an older form, of course. It still looks a little bit archaic to us. The sort of English that you see in Shakespeare, which was around 1600. But this is technically modern English. If you look at it, it might take you a second to figure out exactly what his meaning is, but you can puzzle it out, you can figure it out. Of course, if you look at the original Shakespearean folios, they're a little bit harder to read because the spelling isn't standardized. It's just spelled out like a child sounding it out. It's not because Shakespeare was dumb, it's that there wasn't any standardized spelling until the mid-1700s, and then there were dictionaries and ways, the correct ways to spell words. So I hope that this was helpful for you. I find this really fascinating myself, and that is why when people say, oh, Shakespeare's difficult, it's in Old English, I say, no, it's actually in modern English. It's just a little bit more difficult than the articles or books that you're used to reading. You can do it. You can do it is my point. Older works like this are in modern English. They just are loftier and take a bit more to get into. So if you have any questions about any of this, please do put that in the comments below. Like this video if you like it. Don't forget to subscribe for some good English nerdiness. I talk about literature, writing, English class hacks, and being an author. So hop over to Amazon if you're interested in getting my young adult fantasy novel. Until next Monday, I'll see ya. Bye.